So ministry is an all-hours kind of profession, and sermonating is for me a late-night, after-hours kind of activity. This suits my natural rhythms. I've always been a night owl. So Suzanne and I own an Alexa, one of those talking Amazon devices that follows your simple commands. Despite our oldest child's protestations that we were deliberately inviting a corporate behemoth into our listening space where it would always be listening. But I figure if Amazon wants to listen to me typing out sermons at 1 a.m, I guess that's okay. Suzanne and I call our device Clarissa when we refer to her so as not to accidentally activate her by invoking her name. Anyway, Suzanne has Clarissa programmed to do the same thing every night at the stroke of midnight. First, Clarissa tells us good night in a cheerful but firm voice. And then country singer Patty Griffin begins playing and singing a live version of her song, "O Heavenly Day," the same song every night, her playful, plaintive, soulful voice filling our room. The words are, "O heavenly day, all the clouds blew away. Got no trouble today with anyone. The smile on your face I live only to see. It's enough for me, baby, it's enough for me. Oh heavenly day, heavenly day, heavenly day." On the recording, Patty Griffin says, "This is the first love song I ever wrote. I wrote it about my dog." So for my sermon today, I'd like us to play around amidst some ways of looking at the world that could be a love song to a dog, or a flock of birds, or a bed of cattails in a marsh, that are love songs to the life around us in all its dazzling diversity of form and function, and to this world in which we have been set free to romp together on a heavenly day. I've been reading a steady diet of Robin Wall Kimmerer lately, the biologist and indigenous writer, who encourages us to consider our relationship with nature, to reconsider our relationship with nature, to see other living things, animals, plants, even the landscape itself, rocks, rivers, the sky above us, as kin. She invites us to be kin with creation. She encourages us to form relationships with the natural world that are more intimate, more personal, perhaps more joyful, more respectful, certainly, more playful, more receptive than the Western material world has conditioned us to be. She encourages us to be receptive to the natural world, to listen and learn, to believe that the plants and the animals, most much older than our own species, have their own wisdom to impart that we need. It's a way of seeing the world that is very old, that is newer to me, and that is deeply consonant with Unitarian Universalism, which is a religion, after all, about relationship and interrelationship and interdependence. Now, there's another way theologically of getting to a similar place, which is also a very old way of seeing the world. In the Hindu tradition, there's a perspective which sees in all beings a divinity, a divine spark, the presence of God or Brahma or whatever word we want to use for the creative force that is beyond and behind and underneath everything, unifying everything. In one version of this story, God deliberately forgets herself so that she can encounter herself again in all of the different guises in which she appears in nature, to discover herself, to experience learning and growth and love. All that is, all life, the continuous cycle of life and death, in this view, is a sort of divine game. It's an act of play. The scientist Carl Sagan had a similar vision when he said that consciousness is the universe waking up to encounter itself. And so the story of you is the story of the universe wondering at itself. Now, I like the idea that existence could be a form of divine play, that the purpose of our time on earth could be learning and discovery, that life could be a divine invitation to wonder and love. It feels hopeful to me, joyful, feels very Unitarian Universalist to me. And the idea of a divine spark in each of us, whether you agree with it or not, is also consonant with Unitarian Universalism. It supports our first principle of the inherent worth and dignity of each person, right? The divine in me greets the divine in you. The idea that there is a spark in all other beings is also an echo of our Unitarian tradition, stretching back to Emerson at least, that sees all of creation as sacred and holy, not just the human part of it, that sees God in nature or even God as nature. Now, this theology raises the question, naturally enough, of what happens to that divine spark housed in each of us, housed in the bodies of all living things, when those individual bodies die. Because, of course, it is the way of bodies to die. Now, I don't know what happens when we die. You probably don't know what happens when we die either. We humans encounter death and what lies beyond as the great mystery, about which we can only speculate, about which we may sometimes receive fragments of information, brief glimpses, maybe. Some see death as an end. Some believe there's a continuation. Of course, it is literally true that when we die, our energy and the material of our bodies is released into the matrix of the world, where it is absorbed by other living things and used to continue the dance of life. And many people, from a humanist theological perspective, take comfort in the wonder of that. And so the poet Anne Alexander Bingham wrote a poem about this called "It Is Enough," which I will share with you now. It is enough to know that the atoms of my body will remain, to think of them rising through the roots of a great oak, to live in leaves, branches, twigs, perhaps to feed the crimson peony, the blue iris, the broccoli, or rest on water, freeze and thaw with the seasons. Some atoms might become a bit of fluff on the wing of a chickadee, to feel the breeze, know the support of air. And some might drift up and up into space, stardust returning from whence it came. It is enough to know that as long as there is a universe, I'm a part of it. Anne Alexander Bingham. But beyond the continuation of the elements of the body, there are some religious traditions that believe in the continuation beyond death of the elements of the spirit. And if you don't like the word spirit or the image of a divine spark, call it an I don't know what it is. A secret sauce to being alive, ingredient X, right? Something in the human that can't be reduced to matter and motion, to chemicals and functional organization, something that could somehow endure the death of the body. Now, I'm not today advocating for any particular belief, but Unitarian Universalism invites us to consider different ideas from the world's great religious traditions, right? Anansi's pot of wisdom from all over the world. And reincarnation is a very old belief that there is a divine spark in each of us, in all beings, that continues after death and in some way finds its continuation in another being, in another lifetime. It is the idea that there is some part of us that is in some sense reborn after we die or continues. Reincarnation is found in Hinduism and Buddhism, in pagan traditions, even in early Christianity. The Greek philosopher Plato believed and taught reincarnation. And there are different ideas about what that might mean in practice, right? In some versions of reincarnation, the self passes from one form to another. The self, which means that in some sense, the me-ness of me, the Jamie-ness of me, survives in the new form. My personality might exist in the new me or echoes of it. I may retain wisdom, learning, instincts, habits, fears from the old life. I might retain memories from the old life. And I admit, I personally find this form of reincarnation the most challenging to my scientific worldview, where I spend 90% of my time. Because as a materialist, I view consciousness as something that emerges from the operation of the brain and the body, right? Memory seems pretty clearly to me to be a function of the brain, and I find it hard to conceive of my memories somehow surviving the destruction of my brain. And yet, spooky toddler syndrome is a thing. Do you know about spooky toddler syndrome, right? This is when you're a parent, you're like innocently driving through some neighborhood on your way to the grocery store, minding your own business, and your toddler looks up from the car seat and points and says, "In my before life, I lived in that house. My room was purple. I like my new room." And you're like, "What?" Now, I have not experienced spooky toddler syndrome up close and personal, but it is a thing, as many parents can attest. Maybe some of you in this room can attest. And there are interesting and well-documented cases of young children who seem to, maybe, have memories or accounts of past events that match reasonably well to actual events in the world, or who have information and knowledge that it is difficult to account for them having. You can find these stories all over YouTube. Oprah did a special on it. There's a very famous case of an Englishman named Arthur Flowerdew, who was born in 1906. He was haunted throughout his entire childhood of images of a foreign land that kept coming back to him and memories that he could not account for. And he later recognized those images as the ancient city of Petra in Jordan after he saw it in a BBC documentary. He reached out to the documentarians who were curious, and then the king of Jordan heard about this and actually flew him out to the archaeological site, where he reportedly astounded experts with his knowledge of the city. Take that for what it is worth. You can read more about Arthur Flowerdew in an essay by UU Minister Wayne Arneson called "Next Time Around." It's available online. Now, I can say, just from my personal experience talking to congregants and healthcare workers over the years, that it is not uncommon, not at all uncommon, for people to have experiences around or concerning the dead and dying that are difficult to explain or account for within a purely materialistic scientific worldview. I don't draw any conclusions from that other than to say the universe is big and mysterious, and there's apparently much we do not yet understand. But we knew that already. If there is something of ourself, our experiences, our memory that carries forward, then there's the possibility of knowledge and wisdom carrying forward. And in some understandings of reincarnation, that's the point. The purpose of all these lifetimes is to learn and grow because we can build on what came before. Being human is hard. The wheel of death and rebirth in this way of thinking is like a school of life in which our spirit gets to try and try again. UU Minister Anthony McCarr, in an essay called "Making Sense of Reincarnation," points out that this should be theologically congenial to our Unitarian Universalist principles of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Because searching for truth takes time, right? And learning takes time, and we have such a short time on earth. And it's not ordinarily of our choosing. But what if the soul's learning took place over multiple lifetimes, over the entire expanse of time? Then what could a search for truth and meaning look like as it unfolds over eons? Maybe this idea feels hopeful or encouraging to you. It certainly has a universalist vibe because the ideas about judgment and punishment, heaven and hell, they're replaced with an ethos of try and try again, a universe striving to grow together in wisdom and love that has compassion for our human failings and offers us yet another opportunity to do better, to love better. In other versions of reincarnation, what survives is not ego or memory, not the self per se, but more like the raw energy of consciousness or the divine spark, some creative force that is carried forward. Doesn't contain the memories we identify with, but it is still us. It is still our life force, our spirit, in this way of thinking. And our spirit may be reborn, probably will be reborn in many different life forms. We can return to the dance of life again, not just in the form of people, but also as plants and animals. And remember when I said the divine spark theology kind of gets us back to the same place as Robin Wall Kimmerer's indigenous kinship. Because in a reincarnation worldview, the other living beings you encounter may be kin, not in some metaphorical sense, but literally. That bird might be the reborn spirit, the divine continuation of one of your ancestors. In the next life, that bird might be you. And you can see how this worldview might invite us into a spirit of respect, of kindness and compassion for all beings, because we're all divine sparks in this view, journeying together in these temporary, time-bound vehicles called our bodies, playing together, growing together, suffering together, experiencing life each time from a new and different lens, and encountering something sacred in each other. Now, whether I am persuaded by this theology or not, I like to try it on for size and to see how the world looks from this perspective, because to me, to try it on for size is to listen to a love song to creation. I hear a song in this theology that is hopeful, that is playful, that is joyful, sometimes plaintive, sometimes mournful, but one that celebrates the wheel of life and all of its inhabitants and says, yes, we go on singing together. The poet Wendell Berry wrote, "We clasp the hands of those that go before us and the hands of those who come after us. We enter the little circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers, whose hands are joined in a dance, and the larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life, who move also in a dance to a music so subtle and vast that no one ear hears it except in fragments. To which I say, O heavenly day, may we be grateful." Blessed be, and amen.